Hi, this is Jorge Economics, and in the last video we looked at the fiat currency scam, which is essentially a beautifully executed scam where the bankers can essentially steal wealth from every citizen because they create loans out of thin air, and anyone holding the currency that those loans are denominated in is essentially giving their wealth to the bankers, to the newly created currency. Now, one of the most sinister side effects of this scam is, of course, inflation, right? Now, we're taught that inflation is an increase in the price of goods and services, but that's really not what it is. Inflation is an erosion in purchasing power. In other words, my money buys less stuff. If I have $100 today and that buys me a phone, next year, that same $100 note won't buy me a phone. That's inflation. You get less stuff for the same amount of currency. So, the byproduct of the fiat currency scam is inflation because the banks are inflating the currency supply by creating loans out of thin air. So they need to convince people that inflation is not a problem because obviously inflation is a tax, right? They're stealing wealth. So they can't let people know that the entire system is just constantly stealing wealth for them. So the first thing they had to do to make sure people didn't realize the inflation that was occurring is changing the definition of inflation. So they now say that inflation is a rise in the price of goods and services. That's obviously a lie, right? That's obviously propaganda. How do you know it's propaganda? Well, new currency enters the system through the banking industry. They create loans, and that newly created currency from the form of the loan enters the world. But do people take out loans to buy hamburgers? Do people take out loans to buy Tim Tams? Of course not. Of course not. Right? People take out loans to buy assets. They take out a loan to buy a car, to buy a property, to buy some stocks, some cryptocurrency. So if you wanted to measure inflation, why are you looking at the price of Tim Tams and Big Macs? It's irrelevant. All of the new currency is entering assets. So you need to look at asset prices. Now, anyone can look at the Australian property market and go, oh my gosh, that's a lot of inflation, right? The property market has gone whoop, stocks have gone whoop. How? It's because these bankers are giving loans to Australians that they're creating it. The bankers are just putting the digits into their account. So all these loans that are being given to all these borrowers, that's just increasing the supply of the currency. So if you measure asset prices, the real inflation rate from a lot of economists, which I'll put in the description, a lot of mathematicians that try to calculate this, is around 10 to 15% if you measure real inflation, which is looking at all the prices in the economy, including asset prices. They're clearly lying about inflation, right? Because even the definition is absurd. A rise in the cost of goods and services. Well, your cost of living isn't just goods and services. It's everything. If a car becomes 200% more expensive, well, you need a car. That's just affected your cost of living. You know, if stocks and property and all this stuff goes up, that's your cost of living. That's still prices that are eroding your wealth. So why do they lie about inflation? They're clearly lying, but why do they lie? First is that it's good for governments. Why? Because if the government says to the rest of the world, my inflation rate is 2%, then the rest of the world who is holding the Australian government's debt is going to say, all right, as long as you give me an interest rate above 2%, maybe 2.2%, 2.5%, I'm happy because then I'm being compensated for the loss in value of holding your currency. Can you imagine if the Australian government came out tomorrow and said, yeah, actually the inflation rate's 15%. All of these foreign countries and all of these foreign investors holding bonds, holding government debt, they're going to say, hang on, mate, I demand more than 15% interest rate. If I'm losing 15% of my wealth holding your currency, I want to be compensated. I want a 15.5% interest rate or a 16% interest rate. So the first incentive of the government to lie about inflation is that they get to pay less in debt. They get to pay less on their interest payments on their debt. The second incentive to lie about inflation is wages. If you're a worker and you are being told that the currency, your wealth, is losing 2% a year, so the inflation rate's 2% a year, then you're going to say to your boss, hey mate, in order to not fall behind on the cost of living, I want wage increases of more than 2%, even just 2% to keep up with it. But imagine if everyone realized that, oh my gosh, the inflation rate's 15%. That means all of these workers are going to go, hang on a second, I don't want a wage increase of 2% if my cost of living is going up 15%. I want a wage increase of 15%. So by lying about the inflation, by understating the rate of inflation, they are thus allowing employers to pay less in wages, because now instead of having to rise wages by 15%, they are only increasing wages by 2%. So it allows the government and the businesses to pay less in wages. That's the second. The third incentive is a pretty obvious one, and that's trust. This entire system, this entire fiat currency scam, even the government scam, it relies on one word: trust. The second you tell people that they are losing 15% of their wealth a year by holding your currency, they're not going to trust you. They're going to go, you're stealing from me, which is what it is. So in order to keep trust, in order for the citizens to keep trust in currencies and keep trust in the central bankers and the government, they need to lie about inflation. They cannot tell them the inflation rate is 15%. If all of Australia tomorrow realised that inflation was 15%, do you think we're going to look favourably on the central bankers and the government? Of course not. We're going to go, here, bloody, you're taking 15% of my money. So they need to keep trust in the system. And that means they need to lie about the level of inflation. They cannot let people know how much wealth they are actually losing because of this scam, because of fiat currency. They cannot tell them that. So to keep faith in the system, to keep trust in the system, that they need to lie about inflation. So that's the third incentive. So the three incentives to lie about inflation: one, it allows governments to pay less on their interest payments on their debt. Two, it allows governments and businesses to pay less in wages because they don't have to raise wages to the extent that they should. And third, it keeps trust in the scam. It keeps trust and faith in the establishment. People trust the establishment and they're willing to continue participating in this fiat currency system. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this very simplified explanation of inflation propaganda and why they need to lie about inflation. Hopefully you found this video useful, and I'll see you soon.